Hello everybody, my name is Isabel Romero, and this will be my final project for Art 100A. I would like to begin with my thesis. This will be based on the male form displayed throughout different periods of Greek and Roman art, beginning from the Didactic style and ending in the early Roman art era. I would also like to highlight how Greek and Roman artists continuously improved on the portrayal of human anatomy, and another main idea for choosing these artworks is to demonstrate how each period of art would build upon its predecessors with more realism and naturalism in their depictions of the male form. We'll begin things with the artwork that I've chosen. This is called the Statue of Victorious Youth. This statue is cast in bronze with inlaid copper and stands at approximately 151.5 by 70 by 27.9 centimeters, according to the Getty Museum website. Right from the start, the focal point begins right at his face due to his hand pointing at it after crowning himself with an olive wreath. We then begin to follow this youth's hand from the fingertips to his face, and then we also begin to examine the rest of his body after that. It's obvious that he's standing in a contrapposed pose, and all of his weight is shifted into his right leg. One can also see the beginnings of proper usage of the human anatomy within this sculpture. This sculpture was done in the Hellenistic style, and according to the Getty Museum's website, he's assumed to be a winner of the Olympic Games, of course, hence the name. It is believed that the origin may be that of Olympia, or the youth's hometown. It should also be noted that the statue was probably taken from its original location when the Romans usually started collecting Greek art, and apparently this was at an all-time high, especially for this statue. It was found at the bottom of the ocean and, of course, was brought up and is now currently at the Getty Museum. The second artwork that I picked is going to be the Kuros from Attica. Right from the start, you can tell that the statue is in a static pose and with no motion whatsoever, only one being the left foot taking a step forward, but even so, it looks absolutely motionless, of course, given that it's a statue. The anatomy in the statue, though, is barely beginning to show, and there are more unrealistic proportions within this body. The statue does depict a man in an athletic body type, fully nude, with references to Egyptian sculptures. The only difference between the Egyptian style, according to the textbook, is that the Greek sculptors these figures from the stone block. Another thing about the statue is that it's going to be done in the Didactic style, and this was meant to mark the grave of a man who had recently died. I will now move on to the similarities and the differences between the Victorious Youth and the Kuros from Attica. To start off, both are created in the Greek culture given their, of course, time differences. Both subjects, of course, are men, and both are nude men. It seems that the artists wanted to represent some type of emotion in both statues. Of course, one was rendered a bit better than the other, and there was a bit of attention to detail on the male anatomy in both sculptures. Of course, one was rendered better than the other. And both of the men were depicted in great shape and fitness, especially for their time period. I guess one can also say that these are both the ideal men in the Greek culture. Of course, the Victorious Youth is going to be cast in bronze, meanwhile the Kuros from Attica is going to be sculpted from marble. The Kuros is a very static statue, of course. It doesn't seem like there's any motion to it other than the one foot coming forward. And on the other hand, the Victorious Youth, you can see a lot more motion to it. You can see as if he's just crowning his head with that olive wreath. One can also note that there is much more attention to detail within the facial structure and the muscle shapes from the Victorious Youth. Meanwhile, on the Kuros, it's not as detailed, not as refined, and it is also important to say that the Kuros is from the archaic period of Greek art, meanwhile the Victorious Youth is from the Hellenistic period of Greek art. Next up is going to be the Barberini faun. Right upon looking at the sculpture, one can immediately see the enhancement of the human anatomy compared to that of the Kuros from Attica. The muscles have become much more defined, and there seems to be more motion coming from the statue, although the statue is supposed to be sleeping. The expression on the statue's face is a peaceful one, but some furrowed look can be seen on the brow and it makes it seem as if the subject is lost in whatever dream he's in. The subject is a drunken sleeping satyr, and of course this is also done in the Hellenistic style as well. And it seems as if Hellenistic sculptors turned to trying out different forms of art. In this case, it totally strayed from the classic ideals of rationality and discipline, according to the textbook. And it seems as if the sculptors experimented a lot more in eroticism. We will now move on into the similarities between the statue of Victorious Youth and the Barberini faun. They both seem to have a lot of movement in these statues, and the anatomy is becoming a lot more realistic. You can even see the toning of muscles between the Victorious Youth and the Barberini faun, although, of course, it displays a lot better in marble compared to bronze, and the detail in both has improved greatly, especially when it comes to the hair and the facial structures. Both do highlight the desired qualities in Greek men, and both are from the Hellenistic period of Greek art. And now moving on into the differences between these two artworks is the Barberini faun obviously is much more erotic and sensual, whereas the other isn't. And according to the textbook, although men had been represented naked in Greek art for hundreds of years, the archaic kuroi and classical athletes and gods do not exude sexuality. It seems that sensuality surfaced in the works of Praxiteles and his followers in the 4th century. Of course, another very obvious difference is going to be that the Victorious Youth is going to be made in bronze and the Barberini be made in marble. And the expressions in their faces are going to differ greatly because one has a peaceful, restful face and the other is much more serious and emotionless. Now, the last piece of artwork that I will be introducing is going to be the equestrian statue of Marcus Aurelius. It is clearly cast in bronze and stands at a staggering 11 feet and 6 inches. There's enormous attention to detail starting from the anatomy of the horse to the worrisome expression of Aurelius's face. It seems the clothing is done in wet drapery style, and Aurelius himself looks like a giant compared to his horse. This depicts a strong Roman emperor who rides atop his horse with an approachable gesture. This was done in the early Roman Empire art period, and according to the textbook, the sculptor wanted to show Marcus's character thoughts and soul for all to see. This was also a huge change from classic idealism. We will now be comparing the statue of Victorious Youth and the equestrian statue of Marcus Aurelius. There are only a few similarities, though, that I was able to see. Of course, the obvious one being that they're both going to be bronze casted statues. Both are going to be about respective champions, and then both are going to be portraits of victors. And this concludes my video. Thank you guys so much for watching. I had a great time in this class, and good luck everybody on your future endeavors.